When I first got onto the internet around 2010, 2011, even before that to an extent, although much of that is gone from my memory, there wasn't this centralized force behind where everyone spoke. Uh, Forum culture was still, by and large, prevalent. You didn't have the five major social media sites that everyone just used. Like, when people get onto the internet nowadays, all of them are probably going to go to the most pre-established, understood places that you go to on the internet because everyone is on there, and in commercials, you know, going out onto the street, you see advertisements for like Instagram and stuff. You go to Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, etc. Multi billion dollar conglomerates that everyone uses, in which you have millions and millions of eyes on you potentially. And I have to wonder, what exactly is this doing to the minds of people who are getting onto the internet at the age I got onto the internet, but they're getting onto these websites? I was never on Twitter, even though Twitter existed at the time. I was never on Facebook and these other things because I wasn't interested in them. What I used the internet for was that I had very niche, specific interests that the people in my family, by and large, were not interested in. I mean, I could talk about modern video games and some anime stuff with my family. That was where my interest from them to them originated from. But things like retro games and the deeper aspects of video game history and these types of things, I could not talk to my family about. And as much as I had attempted to every now and again, I found myself much more interested in going on the internet to find these things, having that insular, solitary activity where I could potentially reply to someone's forum post, and my reply wasn't very good. I was the subject of a lot of ridicule on the internet, but it was nonetheless a place where I could share my own experiences and learn from the experiences of others. Always be seeing something about these interests that I had that, at the time especially, were very niche and very specific. So I would go to these forums, and it was a dedicated community. It was people who cared about these things, and when you went there, it was always going to be like a couple, at the most, like 100 people who frequented the board. Like, there weren't millions upon millions of people in these ginormous websites that everyone was on. Depending on which board you went to, you might have only had 50 people who went there. Like, when I go to GameFAQs, which was the website that I went to by and large the most on the internet for like 5 years, I still, every now and again, I still see many of the old posters usernames that I had found when I had just gotten onto the internet at like 8 years old, looking at these things. I still find them there, and it's amazing to me that like that that tightly knit sense of community existed on all of these decentralized forums that were spread across all over the internet, depending on what interests you have, depending on what culture of the internet you come from or want to be a part of. You have your own little space, and then you congregate with people based on that. You can find even distinct humor styles, distinct commonalities of experience in specific boards, you know? And I think this diversity of thought that we have within the centralization of social media websites, uh, allows for people to get away from that sense of community that was once had. I can't imagine what that's like, because, you know, if you wanted to talk to someone one-on-one when you were on the forums, you had like AIM, or you had IRC, or some other kind of chat messaging website, and what you had was your signature. Is that your signature would be under the post, and it would list like your gamer tag, your aim, and all these different things. And you could contact someone through that if you were interested in speaking to them further. You didn't have like Twitter messaging where you could just like this person's tweets a bunch of times after randomly finding them in the algorithm, and then message them if you thought they were a cool person. That sort of centralization of where everybody was just didn't exist. You were speaking to people because you had similar interests to them. And the sort of popularity that's placed on children nowadays, you know, you look at someone like Soph, the alt-right 13-year-old who made YouTube videos and now has a channel of like 1 million subs where she shills Christianity or something now, and free market economics. Like, someone like that would just not exist in the old internet. There weren't even coherent ideologies for most people, because when I was looking on forums back in the day, people would have these very weird, disparate, half-researched political opinions that didn't quite fall into any specific camp. Like, people didn't label themselves as a liberal or a libertarian or these other things. They just kind of had opinions on stuff, and a lot of them were contradictory to one another. But now I see with this homogenization of the internet that we're in now, people, as soon as they get on, they have their platform, Twitter, YouTube, etc., and they're talking to all of these different people, and then they put themselves in a little box, like, this is my group's sense of humor, this is my group's politics, this is what we think. And you have like the Bernie Sanders people, you have the ANCAP people, and the alt-right adjacent, and all of these different things. They group themselves together as a kind of hive mind. Whereas before, it felt like people were grouped together based on a similarity of culture, but that culture had to do more with things that you enjoyed. It didn't have to do so much with, this is my cookie cutter identity that's been served to you through the masses of Twitter. And I look at the comparison between people meeting one another on AIM through forum posts to now with people just searching up random servers on Discord. Like, there are thousands and thousands of people in those Discord servers, but if you just got onto the internet and you don't have any friends and you want to make friends that way, I used to see this all the time back when I used Discord. Thank God I don't use that place anymore, but back when I would see this, what people would do is that they would go into these servers of thousands of people just looking for someone to talk to. You know, there'd be hundreds and hundreds of posts every single day. They'd have to put slow mode on in the chat because so many different people were talking. And it's like, you wouldn't be able to convey your idea and then have an accurate response to it because there'd just be so many different people saying things that it was like a competition for attention because there'd be so many different people. Whereas before on forums, if you made a post, people would read through all of the posts, and then people would respond to your individual points, or they would just make their own thing. Like, it felt like a much slower, more methodical atmosphere for communication in comparison to this strange, myopic diasma of posts going on and on and on forever, in which they have to artificially slow down the chat because there's so many people saying things. But what other Discord servers do you have access to if you come online with no friends? You have to go to the Overwatch server or the PewDiePie server or one of these other random communities that you identify with, and there could be potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of people there. And if you're a socially anxious kid like what I was growing up, even getting onto the internet, it can be a bit frightening. So I can only imagine how it feels to get into situations like that now. In many ways, I think this centralization and this amassing of people into smaller and smaller, larger and larger groups has only made identity on the internet less pertinent, less prevalent. It's everybody's part of these giant, groups. I'm center left, or, I'm part of shit posting video game central or something, and they all talk like each other, they all sound like each other. That distinctness that was once there online on forums feels like it's almost gone now. It's difficult to find these very unique individuals like what we used to have, and if we do, it's usually older people. It's rare that I find young people who aren't part of some kind of cookie cutter mold of the anime community or some other thing, who are really interesting and distinct. Like, I talked to this person, Kieran, for quite some time. A good friend of mine is that, when I talk to him, even though he is part of a lot of disparate groups throughout the internet, takes strong influence from them, he's not the same as anybody else you'll find on the internet, just because he's been able to retain that very niche kind of I am a unique person in spite of all of these other things going on. Even though like he does use Twitter and these other things, he's somehow retained that uniqueness that I think defined people for a long time on forums. And so there are people like that nowadays, but I think the way the system functions, the way that everyone who gets on the internet now automatically has a blueprint of this is the box that you fall into, this is the website that you use that everybody else is on, and now you can have millions of viewers the way that like Soph does. It changes the psychology of how you use the website. It changes the psychology of how you interface with the world, because you're not just some random kid shitposting on a forum anymore or sharing ideas with about 20 other people. Now you're someone who is heard by lots and lots of people who in turn influence you with positive and negative reinforcement, and you're part of this hive mind group. And I think individual thought is slowly being killed on the internet in favor of groupthink and in favor of centralizing everything to such an extent that these smaller communities where people can overtly mock one another and be very critical in what one another believe, while also retaining this sense of uniqueness, this almost sense of incoherence in one's own beliefs. It's kind of gone now. Where like now, if you say, oh, I want to debate you, they have a list of like every single thing that their group believes, and now it's my group believes these things, and I'm gonna tell you what those things are. It's like they're being ideologues. It's like they're part of the foot soldiers for some kind of political movement or some kind of ideological movement, not necessarily involved with politics, but just part of some group. Like, we're the first person shooters collective or something. Where did the individual thought go? Where did the people go who don't really fit into some kind of group but have interesting things to say nonetheless? Back when the internet was more safeguarded, before everyone was on here, I think we saw more of that. And I miss the freedom that people had to be able to say, yeah, fuck you, you're wrong, and I'm gonna tell you why you're wrong. Or if someone had an interesting view, you would go, oh, well, why do you see things that way? That's a strange thing to believe. And they didn't just respond with every single thing in their party line. They responded with some kind of half-baked response of how they see things. And the types of unique individuals that you would have found on the internet back then as well are usually nowadays like the equivalent would be, oh, look at this trans person who's really trans, haha, it's a lol cow. No, where did the effort go? Back in the day you had Chris Chan and all of these really odd people that showed up on the internet. We don't have super weird people online anymore who are like lol cow material. We just have like aromatic and these trap cult people where they go, oh, look at her, she's she gives pills to mentally ill people or something. It's not exciting. It's not the kind of stories and weird things that you would find online back in the day. And I miss that. I miss the storytelling. I miss the uniqueness. I miss the sense of community people would have, or lack thereof, depending on the situation. Where now, the more people that are online, the more it's felt commodified, shallow, and less genuine.